Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to get rank 1 with on the arena ladder. I've also been doing really well with this in constructed events, so I managed to get a few 5-0s in them, so the deck's been performing really well for me, and it's been a ton of fun to play as well. Now before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description. If you click on that, it'll have the deck list there that you can just import into arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And I'm also in the process of writing a full text article about this deck that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, and how I changed the deck for best of one. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well. So anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my 5-colour widespread thieving Niv deck in Explorer. So if you've never played a 5-colour Niv deck before, it's basically a control deck that is built around this card, Mythic Reborn. So this is a 5-mana 6/6 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield we look at the top 10 cards of our library, and for each colour pair we get to put a card into our hands. So what that means is, you know, every colour pair we get to put a single blue-black card, a single blue-red card, a single green-black card, a single green-white card, etc, etc. So it's a really sick way to refuel. Now it is important to note that it needs to be exactly 2 colours, so you unfortunately can't hit cards like Omnath or other copies of Mythic Reborn, but outside of Thieving, Omnath and Niv, it hits every non-land card in the deck. So the idea with Niv is you're basically a control deck that's trying to stabilise, and then you use Niv to just completely refuel your hand. And since you look 10 cards deep, you're really likely to be able to refuel, like, you know, 3, 4, maybe even more cards. Now with Niv, you're typically happy if you get 2 or more cards off it, so rather than trying to force yourself to play a bunch of cards in each colour type, I found it was more important to focus on just running the better cards of each, because like I said, if you hit 2 or more, you're pretty happy, so you don't need to be running green-white cards, you don't need to be running white-blue cards just to maximise Niv. I think it's more important to just make sure that the multicoloured cards you're running are high quality, so that the deck still operates at a high level even when you don't have Niv. So, like I said, the idea is stabilise and then play Niv. There are a couple of problems that I've had with the Niv deck in the past though, and this new card from Streets of New Capenna, Widespread Thieving, really goes a long way to solve those problems. So the 2 main problems I've had with Niv decks is, first of all, obviously since you're running a 5-colour deck, the mana base can be a little bit shaky. Now there are good enough lands in Explorer and in Historic where the deck originated, I think, that you can make the deck work pretty well. However, obviously running a 5-colour deck, you are going to sometimes run into problems where you don't hit exactly the right colours you need. And the second big problem I've had with the deck is that I feel like mana is a real choke point in this deck. And what I mean by that is you often have a bunch of cards, but you don't have enough mana to cast it, you know. Especially with Niv, if you cast a Niv and you completely refuel your hand, oftentimes you can get out-tempoed, and typically you'll lose with a Niv deck with a bunch of cards in your hand. So Widespread Thieving, this new enchantment, goes a really long way to help fix those problems. So this is a 3-mana enchantment with Hideaway 5, and what that means is when it enters the battlefield, we look at the top 5 cards of our library, and we exile one of them underneath the Widespread Thieving. And then it says, whenever we cast a multicoloured spell, we create a treasure token. And once we created the treasure token, we can pay 1 mana of each colour. And if we do, we can cast the Hideaway card, the card that's been exiled by Widespread Thieving, without paying its mana cost. So first of all, the fact that this creates a treasure every time you play a multicoloured spell is huge. And this is kind of the main reason that we're running it in the deck. So the fact that it creates a treasure every time you cast a multicoloured spell essentially reduces the cost of all of your multicoloured spells by 1. You know, if you can get 2 Widespread Thievings onto the battlefield, all of your 2-mana spells are basically just netting you 2 treasures, so they're essentially free at that point. But it's actually even better than that, because if you don't use up the treasure you use during that turn you get it, you're actually netting mana for following turns. And on top of that, since treasures can produce mana of any colour, it also works as mana fixing. So Widespread Thieving really goes a long way to solve both of those problems that I've had with Niv decks, in that it's constantly netting you mana, so you're never really going to run out. You're always going to be able to cast all of the spells that you get off Niv, so you're not going to end up in those situations where you have a bunch of interaction but you don't quite have enough mana to cast it. On top of that, since you are playing a 5-colour deck, you know, say you have 6 mana available and 3 pieces of interaction, since most of your spells are going to be exactly 2 colours, the chances of you having the exact mana you need to cast all 3 of them is really difficult. So the fact that the treasures can produce mana of any colour really helps to ensure that you're not stuck on mana. You can always cast what you get off it, which is huge. And then the fact that it has the Hideaway ability is really good as well. You know, if this didn't have the Hideaway ability, I think it would still be a consideration to run, but the fact that it essentially replaces itself, and it replaces itself with the best card in your top 5, is huge as well. The ideal thing to hit off Widespread Thieving is Niv. You know, that's one of the other really big benefits of Thieving. Not only does it unlock a lot of mana that the Niv decks have struggled with in the past, but it also helps you find your most powerful card in Niv. Even outside of Niv, we have Omnath and Scarab God that are great hits to get off it as well. And even outside of that, you know, hitting an expressive iteration or a piece of interaction, even though it's not ideal, is still great at ensuring that widespread thieving always replaces itself whilst unlocking all this mana that you have access to as well. So thieving is such a great upgrade to this deck, and the deck has felt significantly more powerful since running this. And on top of that, every game where I resolve a widespread thieving, the deck just runs so much more smoothly. So I think this is such a big upgrade to the deck. I'm super high on it right now. So then the other cards in the deck, I think I'm going to start off by having a look at the interaction that we're running, and then we'll have a look at the other cards. So first of all, we've got 4 copies of Tyrant Scorn. So this is a 2-mana instant. We can either destroy a creature with mana value 3 or less, or return a creature to its owner's hand. So in this slot in the deck, I wanted to be running instant speed creature removal. You know, like I say, we are a control deck, so we do need to have ways to kill creatures in the early game. And in terms of the multicoloured 2-mana creature instance that we have access to in the format, we're picking between Tyrant Scorn, Justice Strike, which we have in the sideboard, and the other real option that you've got is Vanishing Verse. Now, in a vacuum, I think Vanishing Verse is probably the slightly better card out of all 3 of them, but the problem with Vanishing Verse in this particular deck is twofold. First of all, it doesn't kill Greasefang, which is a really big problem. Now, Greasefang is a pretty big part of the metagame, and as a control deck, the 2 main ways that you have of interacting with Greasefang is either with Graveyard Hate or instant speed creature removal to kill it before it gets Parhelion back. Now, since Niv is typically a deck that wants to be running a lot of instant speed interaction, I felt like it made more sense to lean more into that direction. And so, I don't think you can run Vanishing Verse at all while Greasefang is a reasonable part of the format. You can't afford to be running your cheap instant speed interaction to not be able to kill Greasefang. And on top of that, you know, the other advantage of playing Vanishing Verse is that it can also kill non-creature permanents that are mono-coloured. And this slot is just for trying to kill creatures, really. I'm not too bothered about killing other mono-coloured permanents. And there are also a lot of other creatures that Vanishing Verse doesn't hit. You know, stuff like Mayhem Devil, Burning Tree Emissary. There's a lot of multicoloured creatures in the format that we really need to be able to kill. So Tyrant Scorn and Justice Strike kill a bigger portion of the creatures that we're looking to kill in the metagame. Now, in terms of Tyrant Scorn versus Justice Strike, they both obviously have their strengths and weaknesses. The big downside of Justice Strike is obviously that it can't kill creatures that toughness is greater than their power, and the obvious downside of Tyrant Scorn is that it can't kill bigger creatures. However, it does have some kind of hedge against that in that you can bounce them. So between the two, I think the main reason I've gone for Tyrant Scorn here is firstly, there are quite a few creatures in the format where the toughness is greater than the power that are very important to kill. Specifically against the Selesnya Angels deck, not being able to kill Bishop of Wings and Righteous Valkyrie is a really big issue. And then also against decks like Mono Blue, you've got Supreme Phantom that you really want to be able to kill as well. So in general, I think Tyrant Scorn kills a bigger variety of creatures that we want to be targeting, which is huge. And then again, you know, even if we're against bigger creatures, we do have the option to bounce them for a bit of tempo. And on top of that, we can also bounce our own creatures with Tyrant Scorn, which is really strong with Niv. So if we have Niv on the battlefield and we need to refuel, we can just use Tyrant Scorn to bounce Niv back to our hand. We can also do it in response to removal, which is really huge as well. So in general, I think Tyrant Scorn is the best creature removal that we have access to in this slot. Then we've got 4 copies of Assassin's Trophy. So generally this isn't a card that I'm super high on because giving the opponent a land is a really big drawback. However, in this deck I think it's kind of needed for 2 reasons. First of all, you really need to have flexible removal to be able to kill non-creature permanents. And second of all, even though giving the opponent a land is a really big drawback, I think the way this deck is built, it's not as bad compared to most other decks. So first of all, being able to kill non-creature permanents is so big in this deck because the way this deck works and the way this deck is so powerful is it basically never runs out of gas because you have tons of ways to refuel between Niv Mizzet, Expressive Iteration, Thieving and Omnath both replacing themselves as well. So the idea is you just run away with the game in terms of card advantage and you always have answers for whatever the opponent has. You know, plays like a very traditional control deck. However, without Assassin's Trophy, you don't really have good ways to deal with non-creatures. You know, this deck is great against creatures because we have tons of removal, we have life gain off Clarion and Omnath, so it's very easy for us to stabilise against creature decks. But if we don't have Assassin's Trophy, we struggle against Planeswalkers for a start. We can attack them with Omnath and Niv, but if the opponent can kill them, it's actually quite difficult for us to attack Planeswalkers, so having Assassin's Trophy being able to kill Planeswalkers immediately is huge. And also there are obviously other enchantments and artifacts that can run away with the game, you know, stuff like Great Henge, Trail of Crumbs, Fight Rigging as enchantment, stuff like Witch's Oven as artifacts. So we could have tons of card advantage, a really strong late game, and still end up losing to these Planeswalkers, enchantments and artifacts if we didn't have access to Assassin's Trophy. So for that reason, and for the fact that cards like Abrupt Decay and Maelstrom Pulse aren't legal, Assassin's Trophy is our only real option. And then the downside of Assassin's Trophy giving the opponent a land, you know, typically that is a really big issue, but since we have such a strong late game, and we have so much card advantage, and we're always going to have answers for stuff, giving the opponent a land isn't really that much of a deal, big of a deal in this deck, unless you do it in the first few turns. You know, if you have to Assassin's Trophy on turn 2 or 3, give the opponent a land, and then they out-tempo you, and they can kill you before you stabilize, that is where it's weak. But turns like 4 onwards, it really hasn't mattered as much compared to most other decks. So I feel like, even though Assassin's Trophy in general isn't the best card because of the drawback, I feel like it's really necessary in this deck because of the reasons that I've said. And then we've got 4 copies of Growth Spiral. So I really like this card as a way to ramp. You know, like I said, mana is definitely a choke point in this deck. So getting ahead on mana, you know, ramping on turn 2 has felt so strong. You know, like I said with Widespread Thieving, the games where I have Thieving resolved, the deck feels like it runs so much smoother. Same thing with Growth Spiral on turn 2. If we can ramp in this deck and we can get ahead of the opponent on mana, we can stabilize so much easier. So Growth Spiral is great there. And additionally, it also allows us to trigger the second landfall ability on Omnath, which is really nice. Speaking of Omnath, Omnath is here as a 4-of. Now this is a card that I was initially only running as a 1-of in the deck, and the more I played with it, the more I liked it, and ended up going to 4 copies and have not regretted it at all. This card is really strong in the deck. So 4 mana 4/4, it replaces itself when it enters the battlefield, and then the landfall abilities, whenever a land enters for the first time we gain 4 life, and when it enters play for a second time we get 4 mana back. Now as you can see, this deck doesn't really have that many ways outside, well, it doesn't have any ways outside of Growth Spiral of getting a second land in play. But even if we couldn't do that at all, I think Omnath is a great card. So 4 mana 4/4 is just a great body at both closing the game out, similar to Niv, we can start attacking to win with the Omnath. It's a great blocker in the early game, but the fact that it basically just gains us 4 life every single turn is so big at stabilizing against aggro. Even if we didn't have Growth Spiral in the deck to sometimes enable this second landfall ability, I still think I would run this as a 4-of, just because gaining 4 life is so important. When I was just running the deck without Omnath, I did sometimes struggle against decks that had good reach. You know, we would very easily stabilize, but then we could get burnt out by stuff like Catavan, by burn spells, by Arclight Phoenixes and stuff. So the ability to gain 4 life every turn is just so huge at ensuring that we stabilize properly against these aggressive decks. Even if we don't have removal, just gaining 4 life every turn, it could easily just blank the opponent's combat step pretty easily. And then, like I said, since we are running Growth Spiral, we can just get the mana back off the second landfall ability sometimes as well, which is huge and can help us get ahead on mana as well. So Omnath, really nice part of the deck. And then we've also got Deafening Clarion, so I probably should have covered this when we were talking about creature removal. So this is a 3 mana sweeper, deals 3 damage to each creature, so dealing 3 to each creature for 3 mana is a great rate. But the fact we also have the ability to give our creatures lifelink, similar to Omnath, is just huge at stabilizing by gaining us a bunch of life. So all of our creatures that we run, Gigantha, Omnath, Scarab God and Niv Mizzet, all survive the Clarion, so we can use both modes on this, wipe the opponent's board, and then just attack in for a huge amount of damage and gain the life, which can often just be good enough to completely close the game out against these aggressive decks. So Clarion and Omnath, just giving us access to main deck ways to gain life, is so huge in a lot of matchups. Only running 3 Clarion because we do have a bunch of other creature removal in the deck. So I don't feel like we need the full 4 copies. We do have the 4th copy in the side for those matchups where it's good, but Clarion is just very good at stabilizing against the aggressive decks, and also a lot of the mid-range decks are running stuff like Fable of the Mirror Breaker that this is really good against as well. So Clarion, really, really strong card. And then finally we've got a single copy of Scarab God. So this is more of a recent addition to the deck. And this is obviously a generically powerful card. In general I think it's too slow, but I feel like it's really important in this deck as a 1-of, because I found when I wasn't running Scarab God that against very grindy decks, I would sometimes get close to decking out, because the only win conditions we have in the deck is 4 Niv, 4 Omnath and the Gigantha if we're not running Scarab God. And if the opponent is also running a deck that can grind very effectively, if they can kill all of our creatures, we no longer have any way to win the game. Whereas Scarab God just basically ensures that we win those long grindy matchups, because it can single-handedly win the game on its own. You know, even without opponent's creatures in the graveyard, using this to reanimate a Niv and get its effect, or an Omnath, is really strong. But the fact that we can just animate our opponent's creatures just means that we can single-handedly build up a whole board, and we're guaranteed to win those long grindy games, because even if the opponent does have a lot of removal and they can take out our Nivs and Omnaths, Scarab God just keeps coming back to our hand constantly, and so it's very difficult for those sorts of decks to deal with it. Additionally, it also works very well with Widespread Thieving as a mana sink that we can just use to make use of all the excess treasures that we have. So Scarab God is just really important in those grinding matchups to make sure that we still have a win condition, even if the opponent is packing a lot of creature removal. Then we've also got Gigantha as the companion. So typically when you're running Gigantha as a companion, it's usually just a free card, you know, just a free 5/5 that you can play. But this deck, the activated ability is so big. You know, we can tap it to make 1 mana of each colour, which means that we can basically play Niv for free. It means we can play Omnath for free. It means that we can activate the Hideaway ability on Widespread Thieving for free. So Gigantha is just a great card to have access to in general, especially as it mitigates Flood. But I think this is probably the best Gigantha deck because we can really make use of the activated ability really well. Then in terms of the mana base, obviously almost all dual lands in a 5-colour deck. These new triomes are so nice at ensuring we have the right mana. Then the rest is just shocks and check lands, running slightly more blue and red sources because we're running more blue and red cards than any other colour. I feel like a single basic is also really important to not get blown out by stuff like Field of Ruin as well. And in terms of the number of lands, 28 lands has felt like a really, like, you need to be running a high land count in this deck because it's a deck where if you miss your land drops you're going to lose to yourself. Like I said, mana is a huge choke point, so we want to make sure that we keep hitting land drops. And we're a deck that's running 4 growth spirals as well, so you need to be running a high land count. It honestly could be right to go even higher on lands. I think 28 is probably the minimum you need to be running, but overall it's felt like a good amount to me in general. Then onto the sideboard. Against Control, we've got 4 copies of Dovin's Veto and 4 copies of Siphon Insight. So the Control matchup, I wanted to have at least 8 cards in the sideboard because that's a matchup where we want to be boarding out Scarab God, 3 Clarion and 4 Tyrant Scorn. Generally, our main deck is very well set up to beat creature decks and a little bit soft to control. That doesn't mean that we can't beat Control game 1 because they're also going to have quite a few dead cards against us. But I wanted to make sure that we had 8 cards post-sideboard so that we can cut all of the cards that aren't great in that matchup. Dovin's Veto is really good in the control matchup at just being able to make sure that we can stop the opponent's proactive threats like their Planeswalkers. Stopping stuff like Teferi, Narset, Wandering Emperor is really important. But it also allows us to try and fight on the stack, trying to win counter wars as well. You know, using a Dovin's Veto to counter the opponent's counter spell to force through a Niv Mizzet is really important. And Veto is another card that works very well with Widespread Thieving because we can have treasures available so that we have the mana to back up our Niv with Veto. Another great thing while we're on the topic of Thieving is that Thieving with Niv is really strong. You know, if we play Thieving on turn 3 and then we play a multicolored spell on turn 4 and we keep the treasure, on turn 5 when we cast the Niv, we'll have 2 treasures available, which means, kind of similar to how Teferi plays out, we can play Niv on turn 5 and we then have 2 mana off the treasures to protect it with our 2 mana interaction, or stuff like Dovin's Veto as well. So Thieving is just really nice alongside our threats to make sure that we always have mana available to protect them. And Veto with the treasures off Thieving is really nice at just getting ahead of control decks in terms of having mana available to win those counter wars. So Veto, really important card against control. And then Siphon Insight is the other 4 that I'm running against control. Now I went through a lot of different options in the control role. The first one that I tried was Legion War Boss because typically, you know, control decks will be keeping in creature removal against you to kill your Niv and Omnath, but generally it won't be the cheap creature removal. They'll be keeping in stuff like maybe Fateful Absence and stuff like that. So they're likely to trim on some of their creature removal, which means that War Boss could be an effective way to pressure them. However, since we don't really have many other creatures to attack alongside War Boss, our clock isn't really that fast. And one card, since our deck isn't that fast at closing the game out, one card that I wanted to be able to play around is Farewell, because that can be a card that is a blowout. You know, it can kill Niv, it can kill Omnath, and it can kill Widespread Thieving. So I wanted whatever card that we brought in against control to be able to play around Farewell. So the first cards that I started trying out were Planeswalkers. I tried Teferi, I tried Kaito Shizuki and the 3-mana Kaya. And they were all pretty reasonable cards, but the problem with the Planeswalkers is that the control decks are likely to be bringing in more counter spells against us, especially stuff like Mystical Dispute, because that can counter both Niv and Omnath, and Scarab God as well. We board that out, but they can counter all of our Planeswalkers that we bring in for 1 mana off Mystical Dispute. So whilst the Planeswalkers are very strong cards against the control decks to be bringing in, they're also unlikely to resolve because the control decks tend to bring in more counter spells against you. So I started testing out Siphon Insight as well. and I've been really impressed with this card. So similar to Thieving's Veto, it's, you know, multicolored card, so we can hit it off Niv, we can trigger widespread thieving with it. But the reason I really like Siphon Insight is because it trades, first of all, it trades favorably with counter spells. Even if the opponent has a counter spell, since we get 2 activations off it because of the flashback, they can counter one of them and we still get to cast it again. And basically everything we can hit off Siphon Insight is good in that matchup. Post sideboard, the control deck is going to be made up of basically Planeswalkers, counter spells, and card advantage. They're not really... Oh, I guess they could have some creature removal as well, but almost everything that we can hit off Siphon Insight, if it's not a land, is great. If we hit counter spells, that's great. We can then counter the opponent's stuff. We can hit Planeswalkers, that's great because they struggle to deal with Planeswalkers. And if we hit card draw, that's also great because it helps to dig for our other stuff. So we can hit basically everything that's good off Siphon Insight. And it's another card that plays well with widespread thieving because we can generate treasures off the Siphon Insight when we play it, and then we have excess mana off the widespread thieving in order to cast what we hit off the Siphon Insight. And additionally, it also plays well with Thieving's Veto because we can keep up mana for the veto, and if the opponent doesn't have anything that we want to counter, we can just Siphon Insight. So Insight is great because it's cheap, it trades favourably with counter spells, and post sideboard, unless you happen to hit creature removal or just lands, basically everything else that you can hit is going to be good, and it gives you excess stuff that you can play off the money you get off widespread thieving. So I've been really liking these Thieving's Veto and Siphon Insight against control. Then we've also got 2 copies of Culling Ritual, so this is here predominantly for the sacrifice decks. Now one thing I do want to say is, I've got some gameplay of this deck coming up. Culling Ritual is actually a card that I've changed since the gameplay. So when you look at the gameplay, you'll see that I have Yasharn in the sideboard as my card that I was running against Sacrifice. Since I recorded the gameplay, I've played against Sacrifice quite a few times, and I don't think Yasharn is that great. So Yasharn is a card that, if it stays on the battlefield, will basically just win you the game against a sacrifice deck. But the problem with this is, if the opponent can kill it, and they can kill it quickly, it basically just has no impact whatsoever. And post sideboard, if the sacrifice deck is running more generic removal, you know, stuff that isn't Fatal Push, maybe like Infernal Grasp or Mortality Spear, they're going to be boarding that in order to kill your Niv Mizzet and Omnath. So because they're going to be bringing in their more generic removal, that will also happen to hit Yasharn. And Yasharn getting killed, like I said, basically does nothing. So I've really liked swapping out Yasharn for Culling Ritual because the main cards that are really bad against us, or sorry, are good against us from the sacrifice side, is Trail of Crumbs, Meathook Massacre, and Witch's Oven. Basically everything else in the deck we can kill with our creature removal or whatever else it is. Those are the main cards that can win in the game, because Trail of Crumbs can keep generating value for them, Meathook Massacre can drain us out, and same thing with Witch's Oven, Cauldron Familiar. So the fact that Culling Ritual kills basically all of the problematic cards that we typically struggle to deal with, and then generates mana, and it has a guaranteed impact on the game, unlike Yasharn, which can just die to creature removal. I've much preferred Culling Ritual. And there's also some potential upside if you do come up against another deck that is running a lot of 1 and 2 mana permanents. We can also board it in there as well. But Culling Ritual mainly there for the sacrifice decks. And then additional removal, we've also got 3 copies of Justice Strike. So I wanted to have extra instant speed interaction in the sideboard. First of all, just to help against the creature decks even more. But I also wanted to have a high density for the Greasefang matchup. You know, since we're not running any Graveyard Hate, which I think is fine because I think the only really threatening Graveyard deck that I commonly come up against is Greasefang, and you can beat Greasefang just with instant speed removal. I wanted to run Justice Strike as kind of like an extra 3 copies of a Tyrant Scorn-esque effect, if that makes sense. And the other really nice thing about Justice Strike is it can also kill bigger creatures. You know, if you're against Jund Sacrifice and they have Korvold, we can also bring this in to be able to guarantee kill Korvold. So extra instant speed removal just for creature decks. And being able to kill Greasefang more consistently as well is really important. And then finally we've also got the 4th copy of Deafening Clarion, just for the matchups where it's good, where we need the extra life gain or where we need the extra sweeper effect. So that's the deck. I've had so much fun playing this deck and it's felt super strong. So if you like this sort of deck and you've got the wildcards for it, definitely check it out and definitely try playing it if you can. So anyway, that's the deck. Next up I've got some gameplay. I've got a full 5-match constructed event so you guys can see the deck in action. So I hope you enjoy. If you've got any questions at all, drop me a comment below, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up.
Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, I mean this hand looks pretty good, I think. We can cast Growth Spiral, so as long as we can keep hitting land drops here, this hand is great. We don't have red Yeah, I think red mana is the only thing we're missing, but this is one of the main reasons I really like running 28 lands in this deck, because you're pretty confident you're going to keep drawing lands. Okay, so the opponent leads on Thoughtseize here. I'm not quite sure what they'll take. You know, Widespread Thieving is probably the most generically powerful card, but we don't currently have red mana in our hands, so that's the only card that we can't actually currently cast. Since we have 2 Growth Spiral, I don't think they're really incentivized to take either of those. They could take Trophy or Scorn, depending on what they've got in hand. Okay, so they do take Thieving, which, you know, Thieving is a really strong card, but since we don't currently have red mana, I'm pretty fine with that, I think. Okay, so Den of the Bugbear, so I'm pretty sure they're on red-black mid-range. I don't think the Mardu Greasefang decks can afford to run Den. Interesting, they take Assassin's Trophy, so that makes me think they might have a Planeswalker in hand. Going to shock in the Temple Garden. I mean, technically we probably should have played the Watery Grave there just to have the option to Tyrant Scorn, but I honestly can't think of any creature that I would want to Scorn here. Like, I'm 99% sure I just want a Growth Spiral. If they did play something I want to Scorn, we could just play it next turn off the Watery Grave anyway, so a Growth Spiral here, put the Watery Grave into play, and we miss a land drop. That's really bad. So I think we probably have to Growth Spiral here just to try and hit a land. We don't currently have red for Iteration. We would have done that instead. Oh, I'm perfect. Okay, so we hit a red land. That's great. If we hadn't hit a red land there, I think we'd have been in trouble. But since we have, I'm pretty confident now because we have double Iteration. Clarion is also very good against Fable of the Mirror Breaker because we can use it to kill the token and the reflection once it flips. So they'll attack with the 2/2 here. And we'll see what else they play. Even if they play another creature here, I think we're pretty incentivized to wait until next turn to play the Clarion, because we really want to be able to tag the reflection with the Clarion if we can. I don't think this 2/2 on its own is that much of a threat, really. So they just stomp us with the Bonecrusher Giant. I guess that makes sense. They've probably twigged that we're not playing any cheap creatures, so they just want to get the damage in while they can. And, okay, they do play the Bonecrusher Giant as well, so okay, Omnath is a nice one. I was tempted to play Iteration, but I think now they've played the Bonecrusher Giant, I'm pretty incentivized to play Omnath here, because then we can Clarion the following turn. Oh, we draw a land as well, which is nice, so we get to gain 4 life here. But we can now Clarion after this reflection flips, and then we can give Omnath lifelink and get in for a huge amount. So we're just, you know, stabilizing and making it so they can't really race us. Because that's, you know, from the red-black, you know, this matchup is pretty good from our point of view, because the way the red-black deck beats us is trying to race or with Planeswalkers, and they're really going to struggle to race against Omnath. Like, that's a card that you just really can't outrace very effectively unless you have like a removal spell for it immediately. Okay, interesting. They attack with a 2/2, which makes me think they've either got another Bonecrusher Giant or they need that mana to cast an extra spell. I don't think I'm going to block here, because I think I'm going to Iteration before the Clarion. Even if they do have a second Bonecrusher Giant, I think I'm interested in keeping the Omnath alive just to try and gain an extra life off a land here. So I think I'm going to lead on the Iteration. I just want to make sure that we have enough mana for the Clarion as well. We do, which is great. Oh, and another Omnath, that's great. So, since they didn't use all 5 mana last turn, I'm pretty sure that means they have a second Bonecrusher Giant in hand, which will mean that we'll probably lose this Omnath after we Clarion, because we'll deal 3 damage to the Omnath, put it to 1 toughness, and then they'll probably finish it off with the Bonecrusher Giant. But I'm happy I didn't block last turn, because we managed to gain an extra 4 life off this Omnath. You know, if we'd have blocked, we'd have saved 2 damage and they would have killed it last turn. So we'll attack here. I'm pretty confident they'll have Bonecrusher Giant, or it wouldn't have made any sense for them to attack with the 2/2 last turn. Yeah, okay. So we lose the Omnath. Thankfully we have a second one in hand though that we just hit off the Iteration, which is great. We also have Tyrant Scorn for this reflection. You know, not being able to kill Fable of the Mirror Breaker when it flips is really bad, so thankfully we already have an answer for it, which is great. And we'll see what else they do here. Okay, interesting. So they fire out the Den. I guess, again, they're just trying to race here. Makes sense. Okay, so we want to Omnath and keep mana open for Tyrant Scorn. It doesn't look like the auto tap wants us to do this, which means I'm going to have to try and manually tap for this, which I'm not very good at. I've only been playing Magic digitally and mainly on Arena, so I have to really think about manually tapping here. So we want red off that. Hold on, this might take me a minute. So we go red. Oh wait, no, I shouldn't have made black off that one. Whoops, hold on. Let me undo. So we go red, red, and then green. Okay, we got there in the end. And now, oh perfect, we hit a land. I was going to say, even if we missed a land off that, we still have mana open to Tyrant Scorn, the Reflection. And then next time we can get Thieving online, which is huge. We can go Thieving into Iteration, which will then start making mana to help us cast whatever we hit off the Iteration. So, I feel pretty good about this spot. If the opponent had a Chandra here or something, that could be problematic, because then they could just kill the Omnath and we would be a little bit on the back foot because we don't have a clean way to kill Planeswalkers here, but hopefully they don't have that. That's kind of the worst case scenario. Okay, sweet. So they don't have anything else. We can just Tyrant Scorn the Reflection here just to stop them copying stuff. And now... Okay, Assassin's Trophy is nice because now we have an answer to Planeswalkers, but now we can get Widespread Thieving online, which is great. So out of these, I think at the current board state, we don't need creature removal, so I'm happy to put under Iteration under the Thieving. Wow, we hit a Niv. Okay, that's huge. And then I think we'll just go for a land here. We want to keep hitting land drops. Play a land to gain 4 life. And we could keep Assassin's Trophy up here, but we're at 20. The only thing we'd really want to Assassin's Trophy immediately is a Planeswalker, which I'm pretty sure they would have played last turn if they had it, so... I think I'm happy just putting Gigantha in hand here just to make use of the mana. And then we can just go... Well, hopefully they don't have Thoughtseize, but if they don't, we can just go for Niv next turn. Okay, they cast a Lockthwin. I mean, that has to be a good sign. Okay, they play Trespasser, sure. They exile an Omnath. So even though you typically don't want to trade here, I think I'm happy to. You know, Trespasser is a card that we will have to deal with eventually, and we've got so much value off Omnath, we don't really need any more life gain off it, so I'm happy to make that trade. We can just go Niv here. I'm going to hold on to... Oh wow, okay, that's a sick hit. I was going to say I'm holding on to the land just in case we hit Iteration, but since we have such a full hand now, I think I'm just going to play the land out, wait for Iteration until we need to refill, and just play Gigantha here, yeah. Okay, that was a sick Niv hit there. So against red-black mid-range, we definitely want an extra Clarion here, because that's really good at mopping up Fable of the Mirror Breaker tokens and Trespassers and Bonecrusher Giants, and I think we'll just trim a Growth Spiral here. See if they're running anything weird. I mean, it all looks pretty standard. Clarion is very good in this matchup, because it kills basically all of the creatures that they commonly run. And they definitely have to assume more of an aggro rule in this matchup, because we definitely have the better late game. You know, they can threaten us with their Planeswalkers, which can be a little bit concerning. You know, generally you want to try and save your Assassin's Trophies for Planeswalkers if you can, rather than using them on creatures or other stuff, but they really struggle to recover from a single Niv activation. Omnath is really strong in the matchup as well at both stabilizing and replacing itself. Iteration is super strong in this matchup as well. So overall, this is the kind of deck that we want to be facing, because we just go way over the top of them. And they're not really fast enough to threaten outracing us either. Like I said, the only real thing we have to worry about is the Planeswalkers. And we do have Assassin's Trophy, and they typically don't run that many ways to kill bigger creatures. You know, most of their removal is stuff like Fatal Push. So I don't think, you know, they might be running Bedevil or Infernal Grasp, but I don't imagine they're running them in that high numbers. So I guess that's another advantage of running Niv right now, is that I don't think that many people are going to be running sideboard creature removal to kill big creatures, and your deck is full of big creatures. You know, you've got Gigantha, you've got Omnath, you've got Niv, you've got Scarab God as well, so I think, you know, it may be if Niv picks up, people will start running more interaction, but the great thing about all of these creatures is they trade really favorably with removal. You know, even if the opponent kills a Niv, if you've got the activation of it, it doesn't matter. Same with Omnath, they all replace themselves, so yeah, this hand looks pretty good. We've got early interaction. We have basically all the colours we need. And And we've got the top end cards. We've got Omnath and Niv here, so... Okay, Widespread Thieving's great as well. That'll help us get to... Well, hopefully it will just mean that we have mana available when we cast our Omnath, when we cast our Niv, which is especially important with Niv, you know. One of the sickest things about Widespread Thieving in this particular deck is we can play it on turn 3, play a multicolored spell on turn 4, and then if we don't use the treasure, going into turn 5, we can play Niv and have 2 mana available off the treasures to cast a 2-drop, and we have a lot of 2 mana interaction. You know, most of the, well, all of the instant speed interaction we're running in the main deck is 2 mana. So that curve out basically kind of means that Niv plays similarly to how Teferi does, and that you always have mana to back it up. So we use Tyrant Scorn on the Blood Tithe Harvester there because, you know, we're just trying to stabilise. We have really strong cards in our hand. We just want to make sure that we get to the late game to be able to cast them. So we don't want to take extra damage if we can afford it. So we're Widespread Thieving here, which is great because it means we can hopefully then cast Omnath next turn and get a treasure. And then if we draw a land, we can then cast Niv and have 2 mana available, which is really nice. So they attack him with the Trespasser. See if they play anything else. Okay, they don't, which does turn it to night. It means the Trespasser is a 4/4, which unfortunately does mean that it can trade with the Omnath here, which is a little bit annoying. Since we have a Niv in hand, I could see trading with this. I mean, it depends if we hit a land or not. We could hold on to the Omnath to try and play a land to gain 4 life back, but I think if we can use Omnath... Okay, they have removal. I was going to say, if we can draw a card off Omnath and then essentially use it as a way to kill the Trespasser as well, we're pretty happy with that exchange. So if Omnath had lived, I think I would be fairly happy just trading it off here because I have Niv in hand to refuel afterwards. Okay, we hit another Omnath, which is pretty sick. So we'll see what the opponent does here. We are at 13, which is fairly low. So Omnath gaining us 4 life off our land would go a long way to stabilise here. You know, even though we do have a lot of stuff in hand, this is a potential scenario where the opponent could just out-tempo us here. They have been missing land drops though, which is great for us. So Duress Array and Assassin's Trophy instead of Tyrant Scorn, which again makes me think they might have a Planeswalker in hand. I think typically if they just had creatures, they would probably take the Tyrant Scorn. So I went for Omnath here to try and hit a land so we can gain 4 life. And I also wanted to make sure we had 2 mana off the Widespread Thieving in order to cast Tyrant Scorn. Because if we go for Niv here, and they have a removal spell for the Niv, then we're in trouble, because then we're under a lot of pressure on our life total. At least now we can kill the Graveyard Trespasser with the 2 treasures, even though we missed a land drop. I think we'll just discard the Growth Spiral here. And now we can now we're kind of stabilised here, that we can just hopefully cast Niv next turn. And obviously if Omnath survives and we draw a land, that's going to further stabilise us here. Okay, so they Thoughtseize away the Niv, that's kind of annoying. We do hit a land though, which is huge, so that goes a long way towards stabilising. And then I think here we're happy to just put Gigantha into hand and pass it back. Okay, so the opponent has the 4th land here. Let's see what else they've got. Okay, so they did have Chandra, they did have a Planeswalk, which makes sense. Thankfully we have the Assassin's Trophy for it. You know, this could be a spot where they could run away with the game if we didn't have this Assassin's Trophy, because, you know, we could play Gigantha, but then if they have a removal spell for it, or if they find one off Chandra, it will just start running away with the game. So this is the sort of spot where Trophy is super important. You know, even though it's not a card that is generally that strong because it gives the opponent a land, in these spots where it's not the early game anymore, Trophy is super important at just being able to deal with random stuff that you struggle to deal with otherwise. So we'll get Gigantha into play here, which, you know, is not that easy for Rakdos decks to kill. You know, like I said, maybe they'll have Bedevil or Infernal Grasp, but they don't typically run that many ways to kill big creatures, so Gigantha could end up being clutch here. Now they can, if they wanted to apply more pressure, they can just fire up Hive of the Eye Tyrant here because it does have Menace, we can't block it, but even if they do, we have Clarion where we can give Gigantha lifelink to swing the race, you know, 5, like, you know, we'd gain 5 life back if we could connect with a lifelinking Gigantha, so even if they do fire up Hive, I don't know if that will actually win them the race because we have the Clarion in hand. You know, we don't need to activate both modes. We can just play Clarion to give Gigantha lifelink and not deal it damage. So the opponent in the tank here. I think this is quite a pivotal turn though. So it makes sense. Okay, so they go blank away the Clarion. That makes sense because that does represent a pretty big swing in the life race. Definitely cycle the land away here. We really don't need another land. Hopefully we'll hit something better. Oh wow. Okay, that's sick. So we could play Niv off our treasures, but I think it makes a lot more sense to use Gigantha to pay for Niv here, and then we'll have a lot of mana to be able to cast whatever we hit off the Niv. You know, these are the sorts of spots where Thieving is just so good at making sure we have mana to cast what we get off the Niv. Wow, okay, that was a pretty good hit. So we can iteration here, and we have a lot of treasure to cast what we hit off the iteration, which is great. Oh wow, that's sick. Okay, so we'll definitely get the second Niv, and then I think we're interested in just casting the Omnath here. And wow, okay, yeah, this game's just completely turned around now. We're so far ahead here. So Omnath will now draw us a card. Okay, so they do have Bedevil. We could Growth Spiral to try and gain 4 life if we draw land, but I don't think it's worth using up our treasures unnecessarily here. You know, 12 life is more than enough when we have 2 massive creatures on the battlefield. Okay, Croxer. So that is also a pretty good top deck from the opponent here because they can play it and escape it immediately. Which is a bit annoying. We would really like to have Tyrant Scorn to kill the Croxer, but I really don't think we can discard a Niv. You know, we have so much creature removal in the deck that I'm pretty sure if we just cast Niv, we'll be able to find another piece of removal for the Croxer. And Niv is a 6/6 anyway, so even if we didn't find a piece of removal, we can just block it with the Niv anyway if we needed to. So I think it's probably just right to discard the Tyrant Scorn here, and then try and refill with the Niv next turn. Oh wow, okay, Scarab God's a nice hit. So, since we've drawn the Scarab God here, I think my goal here, we'll attack with the Niv, and then I think we'll cast the second Niv off Gigantha. And then if we do hit removal, we're in a 6 spot because we can then kill Croxer and then exile it to Scarab God's ability. Oh wow, okay, sick. So now we have Tyrant Scorn and Trophy as ways to deal with Croxer, so now we can just play Scarab God. During the opponent's turn we can Tyrant Scorn the Croxer, and then we can just exile it to the Scarab God's ability to just get it out of the graveyard so they can't escape it anymore. So we'll Tyrant Scorn before it gets the attack trigger. She'll go into full control mode so that they don't get a chance to escape it if they have a way of getting 2 cards in the graveyard. And then we'll just Scarab God in response. Okay, sick. Okay, so we're going second here. Okay. I mean, obviously we would prefer to not have as many lands as this, but I think this is a pretty fine keep. We have early interaction and Niv as top end. As long as we draw some other spells, I think this could work out. Okay, Assassin's Trophy's decent. That could work as a nice removal spell to get us to Niv if we need it. So Gilded Goose. I mean, my first thought is probably Jund Sacrifice. Okay. So Naya, so probably not Sacrifice then. Yeah, not really sure what we're up against here. Could be sort of a mid-range deck maybe. So we could have killed the Gilded Goose, but since we have Niv in hand, the name of the game is just getting to 5 mana without the opponent killing us. And so we would much rather save Tyrant Scorn for an actual threat. Gilded Goose doesn't pressure us at all. Okay, so they played Chariot. I think I'm probably going to Tyrant Scorn one of the 2/2s here, just so they can't just freely crew Chariot next turn. If we kill one of the 2/2s, they then have to play at least another creature before they can crew the Chariot. So Tyrant Scorn will slow them down a bit here. Which, like I said, you know, we have Niv in hand. We just need to make sure that we can get to 5 mana before they kill us. Okay, so Clarion. I mean, I wish I'd had that in my hand last turn. Then we wouldn't have had to waste that Tyrant Scorn. We'll definitely Clarion here. Kill the Goose and the 2/2. And now they don't have anything to copy with the Chariot, and they need, you know, they need another creature to be able to crew it. Wait, what? They're playing Winota. Okay, are you kidding me? So obviously Winota's banned, and this has come up occasionally. Like, this has been a thing for a while now. Basically, if you bring a deck to an event and you just don't finish that event immediately, okay, we're not going to beat this. That sucks. But yeah, basically, this person has entered an event with Winota before it was banned and not finished the event. And for some reason, Arena won't kick you out of the event. Hold on. So I just got to figure out sideboarding. So yeah, we just want extra removal. Scarab God's not good, and we'll cut a Growth Spiral here. But yeah, basically this person's entered an event with Winota before it was banned, and then come back to that event, and Arena doesn't kick you out or anything. It will let you play with a banned deck, which, you know, when it happened in the past, it wasn't a big issue. But now, considering how higher stakes the constructed events are, I think they should prevent people from playing with banned decks, because if we lose this, it'll kind of feel bad, because the deck isn't built with Winota as a consideration in the metagame. I mean, since we have a lot of instant speed removal, it's not that bad, I guess, but if I was playing a deck that was particularly weak to Winota, I'd be quite annoyed. I feel like they should just give you your entry fee back and just stop you from playing, because, you know, the events aren't the best EV, and losing to a banned deck would kind of feel bad. Anyway, so here they could have Winota on turn 3, but I feel like even if they did, they'd probably want to build up a bit more of a board presence before they go for it. So I'm going to take the turn off to play Thieving, and getting Thieving in play will just give us excess mana to make sure that we always have instant speed removal up. And I think Clarion's probably the best pick out of there, because, you know, they're going to have a lot of cheap creatures to enable the Winota. I think we'd rather have a sweeper to stop that. So I think we'll lead on Iteration here, because even if we hit a tap land or we don't hit a land, we can still cast Justice Strike off the treasure. Okay, so unfortunately we don't hit a land. I think we definitely want Tyrant Scorn in hand, so we have additional removal, like a guaranteed way to kill Winota or bounce it. I'm just trying to think which of the other cards we don't mind getting rid of. So yeah, like I said, we definitely want Tyrant Scorn in hand. It's just extra removal. And out of these two, it just depends on which one we would rather send back to our deck. I think probably we would rather have access to Omnath, since we already have a Thieving in play. Getting 2 Thievings into play is very nice, because it basically means all of the 2 mana cards in our deck are essentially free. But I feel like Omnath is a card that we would much rather see later in the game as a way to stabilize, and it instantly replaces itself. You know, Thieving does replace itself, but you do need to pay 5 mana to get whatever you hit underneath the Thieving. So discard Winota. So, I mean, they are stuck on 2 lands. They have been missing land drops, but I mean, I assume they might have drawn a land off the Fable. Either way, since they're struggling on mana, I'm not going to let them attack with the 2/2 here to get them a treasure. And now we've got a treasure off the Justice Strike. We can now play Omnath next turn and still have mana up for Tyrant Scorn, even if we play a tap land. So Thieving, put him in work here, just making sure we can always keep up instant speed removal. Okay, so they play Spellbinder. Interesting, I'm not sure what the best card to take is from the opponent's side here. I think if I only had one piece of interaction, there might be some incentive to take that, but since they're both 2 mana cards, taxing them to 4 mana doesn't really affect much, whereas making Omnath 6 mana does make that card a pretty significant investment, so yeah, that makes sense. So what do we want to do this turn? I think I might just play a Triome and put Gigantha into hand here. We would quite like to get to a point, considering that Fable is going to flip soon, where we can pay the hideaway cost to get Clarion, because even though we would, you know, ideally like to constantly be keeping up instant speed interaction for Winota, if we can kill all of their non-human creatures, we don't really have to worry about Winota, because they just cast Winota on an empty board. It doesn't really do anything. So if we can find a way, you know, if we can find another cheap 2-drop, we can trigger the hideaway on Thieving. And okay, now they've played a Chariot as well. We would really like to try and find a way to get this Clarion from underneath the Thieving here. Okay, so I think not quite sure what to do here. So we can, how much mana have we got? We can play one of these pieces of interaction and then get the Clarion from underneath. We could Assassin's Trophy the Chariot and then pay 5 for the hideaway, but I think I would rather get Gigantha into play first here, because we can Tyrant Scorn the Reflection here. Tyrant Scorn doesn't work as a clean answer to Winota anyway, so I'd much rather use it on the Reflection. Then we can keep Assassin's Trophy up for Winota if they play it, and if they don't play it, we can then go Assassin's Trophy, hide away the Clarion, sweep their board, and then give Gigantha lifelink as well, which is pretty huge. And having Gigantha in play, unless they have a way to kill it, they can only really attack with the Spellbinder anyway, so I think getting Gigantha into play here first is probably slightly better, because then we can follow up with Clarion and attack. Okay, so they're just attacking with the Spellbinder. They don't play a Winota, which is great. I mean, we had the answer anyway. Okay, another Innkeeper, so I'm very happy for them to keep committing to the board here. Okay, they play Llanowar Elves. Okay, sweet. So, we could play Thieving first here and still get the hideaway, I think. So I think we'll lead on the Thieving here. See what else we can hit. Oh wow, there's a Niv. Okay, that's huge. And then we can play Omnath here. And I think we'll still have enough for the hideaway for Clarion. Actually, I mean, I probably should have ordered my triggers there just to make sure that we could, but thankfully it didn't end up mattering. Yeah, you need to make sure when you've got two Thievings in play that you make sure you're highlighting the right one. But yeah, this is a pretty huge turn from our point of view. We can play the Omnath here off the Gigantha, sweep the opponent's board, get an Omnath into play, and then we have access to Assassin's Trophy in order to kill anything the opponent has, maybe a Winota, and we also have Niv underneath the Thieving here, so I feel pretty confident about this spot now. Okay, there's the Winota. So they can crew that with the Chariot, but we can just kill the Winota in response if they do that. And it's essentially free, you know, all of our 2-mana multicolored spells are free now because we have 2 Thievings in play. I mean, I think they kind of have to crew the Winota here, right? Oh, they don't? Okay. I mean, I'm pretty happy to see that. So, I think I'm going to play the 3rd Thieving here while we've got it. See what we hit here. And now we're essentially netting a mana from all of our 2-mana multicolored spells. I think we'll go for Iteration here. I could go for Assassin's Trophy, because you can trigger the hideaway at instant speed, but I think I'm happy to go for Iteration here. And then we can trophy the Winota, which I think is the more pressing threat. Gain 3 treasures, so it's not that Thieving, not that Thieving. We want the one with the Niv underneath it. And then I think I'm playing with the Gigantha here because we want to be able to cast everything we hit off the Niv at this point. And to be honest, we have so many treasures now that we can probably just cast the Iteration here as well, because the Iteration, you know, we're having to pay 5 mana to get the Iteration, but we're getting 3 treasures back off it, so we'll get the trophy. I think we want to put the Triumph back in the deck so we can cycle it away later. And then we get Niv into play. See what we hit. Oh wow, okay. I'd be very surprised if we lose this game now. Okay, sweet, we got there. So I mean, even though we're playing against a banned deck, I think our deck is actually pretty well set up to beat Niv. Not Niv, Winota. Just because, you know, we have a lot of removal, we have sweepers, we have a lot of instant speed interaction, which is the main way that you deal with Winota, really. So even if it hadn't been banned, I think this would be you know, if Winota was still part of the format, I actually think this deck would potentially be even better, because Winota was quite oppressive at shutting out certain other strategies which are more prominent now, and I think Niv, because of the amount of interaction it can run, is actually pretty good against Winota. You know, obviously this is the first time I've played the matchup, because I've only been playing Niv since the Winota ban happened, but it looks like, well, that felt pretty good anyway. So I think we can keep this. It kind of sucks having Assassin's Trophy as the only interaction, but we're typically not going to want to use it until they play a Niv anyway, so Assassin's Trophy is only really a big issue if you play it in the first 3 or 4 turns, so okay, which we might have to. Okay, that's a pretty good draw though. So even though it's playing Assassin's Trophy on turn 2 is pretty horrendous, it is better than losing to a Winota, so I'm going to play an untapped land here just to give myself the option in case we need to. We'll definitely try and avoid it if we can. Okay, so they Spellbinder, which is a bit annoying because I assume they take the Clarion here. Although having said that, we don't have white mana, right? So, but I guess from the opponent's perspective, it's kind of a disaster if we draw an untapped white land here, so they kind of have to take it, I think. So we can either widespread thieving or iteration, or keep up mana for trophy here. So this is tough. Ideally I would like to get thieving into play, but if they have Winota this turn, we just lose at that point, so I think we have to play more conservatively here. Because as soon as we get to 5 mana, we can Clarion. So I would rather keep up mana to stop Winota. Yeah, so they do have the Winota. Very glad we kept up the Assassin's Trophy. And then as long as we can draw a white land in the next couple turns, we can just completely sweep their board. And even if they have another Winota, that will just stop them having any non-humans in play to trigger the Winota anyway, so okay, there's a white land, that's huge. So I'm going to iteration here just because I would really like to draw another instant speed interaction. We hit it, so that's great. Just in case they have Winota this turn. So even though we hit the Triome, I think we have to just shock in a land here so that we can play the Tyrant Scorn. Just to bounce the Winota if we need. Again, we're just trying to stabilise here. We're just trying to not die. Okay, so they don't have the Winota, so we can, I think, just to save some life total here, I'm going to kill the Spellbinder. Otherwise we would have been down to 6. We don't have Omnath or anything. We kind of have to shock in the Steam Vents, which would have put us down to 4. So I think killing the Spellbinder just buys us a bit more time there. Interesting, so they don't play anything here. I wonder what that means. I think we'll just play the widespread thieving now we can. Oh wow, there's another Niv, there's an Omnath. I mean, you almost always want to take Niv, but considering we're at a fairly low life total and we already have a Niv in hand. And the reason I didn't play Clarion there is because I would rather get thieving into play when I can, and you know, the opponent's only dealing us 2 every turn currently. I don't think Winota tends to run many haste creatures, so I'm pretty happy getting thieving into play. And now that will mean that we can just net extra mana and always keep up interaction here. You know, that's the biggest thing about thieving. It just means that you can always keep up mana for interaction. So I think I'm pretty happy Clarioning here. You know, even if the opponent does have Winota, they'll have no non-humans to trigger immediately here. So, and then next turn we can play Niv, or we can play Justice Strike into Omnath, and then we'll also have mana from the thieving to cast whatever we hit off it. Okay, so they have an Innkeeper and Chariot. Okay, interesting. So now obviously we're more incentivized to go for Clarion here because we are down to 5 life. We would quite like to get Omnath into play here. We can exactly afford to do that, but then if the opponent has Winota, we're kind of in trouble because they can crew the Winota, they can crew the Chariot with Winota and get a trigger. This isn't an easy decision here. I think we kind of have to Clarion. It's just debating whether we spend the mana getting Omnath or whether we hold the mana up for Justice Strike. Tough decision here. Because if we get Winota into play, we can go up to 9. But if the opponent then crews Chariot with a Winota from their hand, they could get a Huntmaster in play like they did game 1. But I think it's worth the risk at this point. And to be honest, if we hit a red or white land, we can also shock that in to play Justice Strike anyway. But yeah, plus that's kind of worst case scenario. They need to have exactly Winota and hit Huntmaster for that to be a problem, because we have Clarion. If they hit like another Spellbinder or something, we have Clarion to beat that anyway. Okay, so they just have another Chariot, so I'm pretty sure we're good to win this game now. And we have Clarion to deal with these. We have Niv in hand as well. Plus the Thieving will make sure that we always have mana to cast what we get off the Niv as well. Okay, so they attack here. I think since we have Clarion in hand, I'm very happy to block here. Because obviously, at the end of the opponent's turn, the Clarion will go back to just... the Chariot will go back to just being an artifact again. And so, the Clarion wouldn't kill it. So I'm going to lead on the Niv here. See what we hit. Wow, just one iteration. I mean, that doesn't really matter though, because we can just Clarion here. And see, that's another nice advantage of Thieving there as well. We had to use one of the treasures because we didn't have white mana there, I think. So Thieving just helping to fix our mana there is great as well. And then even though we hit only one spell, Iteration is probably the best one that we could have hit there. Wow, they Cathar our Niv. I mean, that's not going to work out very well for our opponent, I don't think. Again, even though we'd like to save Justice Strike for Winota, there's no way we're missing out on getting another Niv trigger here. So we'll kill the Cathar, get Niv back, get another Niv trigger. There we go, that's more like it. And then we can lead on Iteration here, see what we hit. Or we could just put Gigantha into hand actually. I'm thinking at this point, since we can keep mana up for all of the interaction we've got in our hand, we might as well just get Gigantha into play and try and close this game out. Give them as few draw steps as possible. Because Iteration, we've got a fully stacked hand already. Iteration is kind of just spinning our wheels. Yeah, okay, nice, we got there. Okay, sweet, so we're going first here, which is great. And no interaction, which is a bit sketchy, but we're against the Kahira deck, which I imagine is more likely than not control. So I think we can afford to keep this there. Unfortunately, we don't have any white mana, but we have Iteration to help us dig for it. So, and as long as we hit some more spells, I think this is reasonable. So we'll see what the opponent has here. Again, Kahira might not be control, but I think the vast majority of Kahira decks will be control. Spikefield Hazard, okay. Wasn't expecting that. I mean, maybe they're on Jeskai control, potentially. Going to shock in the Blood Crypt here. We're not going to play the Ketria Triumph because I think with the amount of lands we've got, we would rather save that to cycle than play as a land. Courier's Briefcase. So, definitely not control then. Interesting. Okay, maybe we're against the Transmogrify deck. Because that plays Kahira as a companion, I think. It's the deck that's trying to use Transmogrify and Luca to cheat Titan of Industry into play. Kind of similar to the deck I covered in Historic a while back, but they're using artifacts like Courier's Briefcase instead of Indomitable Creativity. Okay, so I think we're going to lead on Iteration here. I think it's important that we keep up instant speed interaction to stop their Luca and Transmogrify if we can. So even if we miss a land here or we hit a tap land, I was going to say even if we miss a land we can still hold mana up for Assassin's Trophy, but this is a pretty sick hit because we can put Niv into hand, we can play the land, and now we can Clarion off the treasure we got off Thieving. So Thieving already putting in a lot of work here, which is sick. So we sweep their board, and the Reflection's not flipping until next turn, so even if they have Transmogrify or Luca here, they have no tokens to target it with, which is really important from our side. And then next turn, since we already have a treasure, we can Shock in the Watery Grave, cast Niv, and then we'll get a treasure back, which means that we'll have 2 mana open to keep up for Assassin's Trophy and any other 2 mana interaction that we'd get off the Niv as well, which is really important. Like, Thieving and Niv just go together so well, kind of reminiscent of Teferi, as you can constantly keep up stuff to defend yourself, even the turn that you play the Niv. Okay, so the opponent discards Valakut Awakening and Thundering Rebuke. Interesting. Okay, and another Fable, sure. And a Den, okay. So I think here we'll just do that play like I said. We'll Shock in the Watery Grave and just play Niv here. Get a treasure back and see what we hit. Okay, interesting. So we've got to choose between Tyrant Scorn and Scarab God. Now Scarab God can be good if we can get a Titan of Industry into their graveyard, or we can get our Niv into our graveyard, but I think the current board state, you know, that's only going to be good much later in the game. We're much more interested in instant speed removal to try and stop them getting Titan of Industry into play off Transmogrify or Luca. At this point in the game anyway. So they attack. We've seen Thundering Rebuke, so there is an argument to not block here, but I'd be pretty happy for them to use Rebuke on Niv because we've already got value off it, and that'll mean that's removal spell they're not using on Omnath. Okay, so they attack to get the treasure to cast the Titan of Industry. So I imagine they'll kill the Thieving here, and they'll probably either create a 4/4 or put a shield counter on the Titan of Industry. So they don't choose targets immediately. So I think, so we could use Tyrant Scorn on the Titan of Industry once it's had the shield counter put on it, but they're only a couple of lands away from recasting the Titan of Industry, so I think we're much better off using the Assassin's Trophy on the Titan of Industry now. Now that will mean that the shield counter goes on the Reflection, which is going to be a bit of an issue, but I think we're going to have a much better, or a much easier time killing a Reflection with a shield counter than a Titan of Industry with a shield counter, because the only clean way we have of killing Titan of Industry is with Assassin's Trophy, so we would need to damage it and then Assassin's Trophy it later, so I think that was probably the right play. So here we could play Thieving again, but since we have Growth Spiral in hand, I think we're happy to play play Omnath first, and then we can play a land, we can Growth Spiral, and then trigger the second landfall ability on Omnath here, which will give us 4 mana back, which we can then use to cast the Widespread Thieving. Now that does mean that we take a turn off keeping instant speed removal up, like Tyrant Scorn, but as things stand, Tyrant Scorn isn't that great here anyway. We could use it to bounce the Reflection with a shield counter, which isn't great, or we could use it to just remove the shield counter, but either way I don't think there's much of an opportunity cost for taking this turn off to Widespread Thieving, because we're not really happy using Tyrant Scorn on this Reflection either way, so I think there's a pretty low opportunity cost to playing Thieving here. We could get another Omnath here, but I think they're not really going to have that many good ways to kill Omnath outside of Thundering Rebuke, so I'm happy just getting an iteration under the Widespread Thieving here, I think. And like I said, we are shields down for a turn here, but I think that's fine. If that Reflection didn't have a shield counter on it, then we're much more incentivized to use the Tyrant Scorn instead, but as things stand, I think that's a fine play. Okay, they go for Chariot. I mean, we're very happy to see that, considering we've just drawn a Deafening Clarion. And they crew it. Huh. I mean, they can't attack with it. Maybe if they make a copy with Reflection, then they lose the actual Chariot if they do that, so I guess it doesn't really make a difference, but okay, they play Reface as well, so we can now Tyrant Scorn the reflection with a shield counter on it, and then completely sweep the board, which is pretty sick. So we'll use Tyrant Scorn on the reflection, and then we can also pay the hideaway cost to get iteration and still be able to cast the Clarion here. So I think we'll pay the hideaway cost here to get iteration, get another treasure, and then we have enough for Deafening Clarion still. Wow, okay, that's another sick hit. So we can put Niv into hand, and we can actually trigger the Omnath again here, the second land ability on the Omnath, because we just drew the Growth Spiral. So we'll play the Stomping Ground first here, I think. We could play the Triome. I don't think it really matters what order we do this in. Gain 4 life, then we can Growth Spiral, get another treasure, and we can put the Triome into play, and then we could cast another Niv, but I think getting Clarion here is more important. Now we can also play the Thieving first, but is that... yeah, I think that's probably... I mean, it makes more optimal use of our mana. So I think we'll get the Omnath underneath, and then we can Clarion here. And then we've got Niv to follow that up next turn. So that was a huge turn. We just got so much value off that there. Okay, so they crew the Chariot, that makes sense. That kind of stops us attacking with the Omnath, but I'm pretty happy making the trade here because, you know, it stops them crewing at a later date, and we have that second Omnath under the Thieving, so we can just get another Omnath pretty easily anyway. Okay, they play Titan. Hopefully, well, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. I was hoping they would hit the other Thieving, but... okay, so we do lose the Omnath, but, I mean, that's not too much of an issue, really. So, I'll lead on iteration here. Okay, nice. So we hit Clarion, so that enables us to attack with this first Niv here, because they're pretty incentivized to block. Then we can just Clarion to kill the Titan of Industry, and then we can play the second Niv, so we still have a Niv. You know, we don't lose either of them to the Legend Rule. Like, I assume they have to block here, right? Because if they don't block, then we're just going to attack next turn again. Yeah, so they block. We'll lead on the Clarion here. I don't think it really matters if we play the land first or not, but might as well. Otherwise, we're losing the land regardless, so we might as well... well, if we don't play it, we'll lose the land. So we'll play the Clarion here to kill the Titan of Industry. And then we can play Niv, and we'll have 5 treasures available to cast whatever we hit off the Niv. Wow, that's a pretty sick hit. So yeah, I'm pretty confident about this spot now because we can kill Titan of Industry if they play it, we can kill any tokens in response to Transmogrify or Luca. I imagine they don't have a good way to kill the Niv here, really. You know, the only removal spell we saw was Thundering Rebuke, which only deals 4 damage, so... yeah, okay, nice. Okay, interesting. So how are we going to sideboard here? So I think we definitely want to have Justice Strike, and we definitely want to have Clarion. Scarab God can get back their Titan of Industry, but that's a very late game thing. And then, again, I think we can cut Growth Spiral. You know, it does help to get us ahead on mana, but we would much rather have a higher density of interaction in this matchup just to stop, well, especially early interaction, to stop them getting off Transmogrify or Luca, because the way we lose this matchup is if they get an early Titan of Industry down. We're not particularly great at dealing with that, especially if it gets a shield counter on it, so we need to try and kill their tokens before they can Transmogrify it. Okay, interesting. I think we can keep this. The land situation is a little bit awkward because we can't set up to play... oh, okay, now we can. I was going to say we can't set up to play Tyrant Scorn and Justice Strike on turn 2. Now we have the option, which is nice. Okay, so they lead on the Briefcase. What do we play here? I think we probably want to use Tyrant Scorn before Justice Strike, because Justice Strike can be used to kill Titan of Industry, so out of the two, I think we would rather use Tyrant Scorn earlier. Okay, so they play Fable. And I think we want to hold on to Tyrant Scorn. You know, we're not too fussed about... what was I saying? Yeah, we're not too fussed about taking damage from the tokens at this point in the game, but we really do want to make sure we have instant speed removal to stop Transmogrify. Now, we would again love to play Thieving on turn 3 here, but especially off the Fable, they're much more likely to find Transmogrify, and even if they play their third land, like, they can afford to Transmogrify this turn because they can attack with the 2/2, make a treasure. Since they're falling behind on mana, I think we're pretty happy to kill the 2/2 here before combat. If we kill that, then there is now no longer a way for them to Transmogrify this turn because they only have access to 3 mana, so... Wow, okay, Clarion's a pretty good draw here, not gonna lie. Again, I would rather save Clarion for one of these reflections to flip. But, yeah, I think I'm happy to save the Clarion here, because this reflection is going to flip, and then we can take out the 2 tokens and the reflection the following turn. If they play something like an Esika's Chariot, we can kill all the tokens as well, so I quite like saving Clarion to kill the reflection here, because that reflection is a must-kill threat. So I think there's not as much incentive to kill the 2/2 this time, because they could just play the 4th land post-combat. Yeah. Okay, they just put Kahira into hand, sure. So I think we will just go for Clarion here. Get rid of the reflection. Now unfortunately that doesn't mean we do have to then kill reflection again the following turn, but I don't think we can afford to wait that long. I'm going to put stops during the opponent's turn here just to represent Fatal Push. I mean, I guess Fatal Push doesn't even work, but I don't want them to see that we just have nothing, because they're the more incentivized to Transmogrify then. Oh well, they do have it, okay. So maybe, I don't know. I'm just thinking whether that Clarion was greedy. Maybe we should have played it the previous turn or just waited. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm kind of surprised they put the shield counter on the reflection. That gives us more of a chance here, because we can go widespread thieving, and then we can Justice Strike the Titan now. Okay, interesting. I think we probably want the Justice Strike here, just as another way to kill whatever they have. So I think we have to Justice Strike now, just so they can't make copies with the reflection. Again, that does put our shields down for another Transmogrify or a Luca here, but I don't think we have a better option really. And then if we can survive this turn, if they don't have another Transmogrify or Luca, we have a decent chance of rebuilding here, because we have Tyrant Scorn to kill the token. Okay, nice. So it looks like they don't have anything that threatening this turn. So we can either go Niv and dig for stuff, we can go Omnath and try and gain a bit of life, especially good now we've drawn a land, but I think we're more interested in just going Niv here. Try and refuel. We already have Tyrant Scorn in hand. Okay, nice. Now we've got Clarion and Tyrant Scorn as well. That's a sick hit. So even though they managed to get a Titan of Industry in play, I still think we are probably favourites at this point, because if they try and, we can kill whatever they try and copy with reflection, and we still have mana up. You know, that will then generate another treasure which we can then use to play the second Tyrant Scorn if we need. So they could try and copy one of their tokens with reflection, which we can kill, and then they could try and Transmogrify one of their other creatures, but we will have the mana off Thieving to be able to cast both Tyrant Scorns if they do that. And then if we do survive this turn, we have Clarion to give Niv lifelink the following turn, so yeah, this is actually, even though, you know, you'd think the opponent getting a Transmogrify off would be a disaster, but it's not actually that bad here really. So we'll block the 4/4 here, and then I think we're pretty incentivized to kill the Kahira. We're at a fairly low life total, even though we have ways to recover. Since we have a way to generate an extra treasure to be able to play Tyrant Scorn, I think we're happy killing the Kahira, and then we still have a way to kill whatever they target, if they target something with another Transmogrify. Okay, they Luca, so if they target the reflection here, we can just bounce it. Okay, so even though bouncing reflection isn't ideal, the fact it has a shield counter on it, and the fact that we're fizzling a Luca trigger is huge. Now we can just kill the Luca as well. We can play Omnath to gain us a bit of life as well. Wow, I was going to say we don't have any more instant speed interaction, but now we've drawn Assassin's Trophy, we have a way to kill another token if they do go for Transmogrify again, so yeah, this game's looking pretty good again. And we obviously have the second Niv in hand to just refuel again. Okay, interesting, so they got Chandra. I assume they just kill the Omnath here, yeah. We do have the Assassin's Trophy in hand, but obviously we can just kill the Chandra pretty cleanly with the Niv here, so I'm not too worried about that. And then we could cast the second Niv, or we could just get Gigantha into play, which I think is probably the better option. I don't really want to Legend Rule the Niv here when we don't have to. If we didn't have instant speed interaction, like obviously we have Assassin's Trophy, if we didn't have that trophy, I think I would have probably wanted to play the second Niv just to try and hit instant speed interactions so that we don't lose to like Curry's Briefcase into Transmogrify, but yeah. Nice, we got there. Okay, so we're going first here. I can't keep a one-lander. This definitely can keep though, and I think since we have Growth Spiral, I'm going to put back Tyrant Scorn here, because if we're against a creature deck, Clarion is usually going to be good enough to stabilize, and with Growth Spiral you want to have a lot of lands so that you can ramp and still keep hitting land drops as well. So you can play the Glacial Fortress here and just Growth Spiral at the end of the opponent's turn. Okay, Burning 3 Emissary. So we're against probably okay, I was going to say mono red aggro with Embercleave, but if they're running Pyromancers, this could be more like a burn variant maybe. Clarion is obviously great to have here. Wow, okay, Niv's brilliant as well, so now we can Clarion and then Niv the following turn. Omnath is sick as well. I very much doubt mono red deck is going to be able to beat an Omnath, so I'm pretty confident about our chances this game. Okay, Crasher, so maybe they are just playing more of an aggro variant. So we could go Omnath and try and gain life, but I think since we're already, you know, we're at 15, we're not that far behind on life total. We're much better off just going for Niv. And wow, okay, Clarion's a sick hit now, because we can sweep and give Niv lifelink, which I'm pretty sure is good enough to single-handedly win the game on its own, if they don't kill Niv this turn. Wow, they're just committing a bunch of stuff even though they know we have the Clarion. I guess from their point of view, their only real line to win is probably just hope we don't play the Clarion. Okay, I'm not sure about that Wizard's Lightning, because they could have saved that until we play the Clarion and then kill Niv in response, because the Clarion's going to deal 3 damage to Niv. I mean, either way, we still have Omnath, so I'm pretty confident that we probably would have been fine anyway. So we'll lead on the iteration here, because we want to try and hit our next land. Okay, I mean, another Omnath is probably great. You know, against the mono red deck, Omnath is an all-star. Play the Triome, and then we'll activate both modes of the Clarion here, sweep the board, and then we'll go back up to 13 off this attack, which is huge. Yeah, okay, nice. So, I mean, mono red is one of the best matchups for sure. So we definitely want Clarion, we want Justice Strike. Scarab God is still reasonable, but I feel like... Actually, I was going to say it's a little bit too slow, but just as a 5/5 blocker, they're going to really struggle to deal with that. So I think we're just going to cut Growth Spiral here, just bring in the additional creature removal. Clarion in particular is going to be great here, and Omnath at just gaining life. Now, we do have to be concerned about stuff like Rampaging Ferocidon, because a big part of the way we stabilise against red decks is just get big creatures into play and gain life off Clarion and Omnath. And Ferocidon and stuff like Roiling Vortex can shut that down, but we have so much creature removal post sideboard, and all of it can kill stuff like Ferocidon. So it should be good. So here, I mean, Omnath is one of our best cards, but 3 of our cards require red mana, and we don't have red. I don't know. This feels really risky. If we could cast Iteration and we had other off-color stuff, I'd be more inclined to keep it. Like, the only castable card in our hand is Assassin's Trophy, so but as soon as we draw a single red, it's fine. I think that hand's probably too risky, though. This is more keepable, I think, and I think we're probably incentivized to put back an Assassin's Trophy here. You know, we want to have Niv as top end. We've got 3 lands, which is a decent amount to start off with. We got Scorn for early interaction and Trophy for a little bit of extra interaction as well, so I think we can make this work. So the lead on Soulscar Mage. So it looks like they're kind of a hybrid between aggro and burn. They hit a Thieving off the Robber. So even though it kind of sucks having to shock your lands in here, I think you kind of have to. This is another reason why I really like Omnath in the deck, just because one of the issues with playing a 5-colour deck is you inherently have to play quite a lot of shock lands, which means your mana deals quite a lot of damage to yourself. So I think, yeah, having extra life gain is important. So we'll definitely Tyrant Scorn the Robber before combat here, so they don't get an extra card off the Robber trigger. And we'll play the Triumph here, and then we'll just try and get Omnath online next turn. Even though Assassin's Trophy early isn't great to play, I feel like against a deck like this, we are pretty incentivized to just kill everything as quickly as possible, and it shouldn't really matter that much about giving them an extra land. So we'll take 1 from the Soulscar Mage here, and then we'll just kill the Pyro. Does give them an extra land, like I said, but that is potentially saving us 3 damage, which I feel is much more important. So again, unfortunately, we do have to shock in to play the Omnath here. But I think it's absolutely worth it, because we're potentially preventing a lot of damage that could be done. Now, unfortunately, the issue with Soulscar Mage is they can still probably freely attack, because their burn spells, even if they can't cleanly kill... Oh wow, okay, Froston's not great here. Probably should have played those creatures in a different order, but... Oh wow, okay, that was a sick top deck. So now we can kill Ferocidon, and we can start gaining life off the Omnath here. We could play Widespread Thieving, but I think that's really greedy. We really don't need to, and it's not worth essentially taking 2 damage just to do that, really. So another Kumano faces Kakazan. Yeah, like I was saying before, the issue with Soulscar Mages and burn spells is they can usually freely attack and just reduce the power and toughness of Omnath with their burn spells, because Soulscar Mage converts their burn spells into counters. But thankfully it doesn't look like they have any burn spells. Well, they obviously don't, but... Wow, okay. More Clarions is great here. And then we can just play the land. Omnath gains us 4 life, and then we can just pass back. And then we've got Clarion again. If we can resolve this Clarion, that's definitely going to put the game out of reach for the opponent. But yeah, Omnath has been super clutch here. It's gained us a bunch of life. Okay, nice. Okay, sweet. So we're going first here. And, I think this is a reasonable keep. We've got Spiral and we can cast it. Unfortunately, we don't have any red mana for any of the other cards in our hand, but we're running more red sources than any other lands in the deck. So between the next couple of draw steps and the draw we get off Spiral, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to find a red land relatively soon. And additionally, even if we don't, we can still put Gigantha into hand as a worst case scenario. So this might be a little bit of a risky keep, but since we have so many draws before we need to hit the red mana, I don't think it's too much of an issue, really. Okay, so the opponent's mulliganed to 6, I think. I've not really been paying attention. Obviously in the tank about their keeps. But yeah, I think, you know, even though 4 of the cards in our hand are red, since we're running a lot of red mana sources, I think we have a pretty decent chance that we'll be able to draw one on time. Okay, opponent goes down to 5 then. Basic Island. If this is Mono Blue Tempo, it might be a rough matchup. Oh, okay, means no prototype. Interesting. And Ornithopter. Okay, so it's maybe an affinity-based deck. So I'm going to Growth Spiral now. We did draw the red land straight away, which is sick. I'm going to Growth Spiral now just to play around Metallic Rebuke, because I imagine that's a card that they're playing. And getting Spiral countered here would be kind of brutal. Now we have the red mana, we can Iteration if we miss a land drop. We can Widespread Thieving as well. Okay, Reality Chip. That's a little bit scary. We don't have an answer to it at the moment, but we do have a lot of potential removal. Wow, Bag of Holding. Okay, that's not what I expected to see. So if we'd hit our land drop, I think I'd played Thieving, but since we missed lands, we'll definitely Iteration here. Okay, so we hit lands, which is decent. And we do have the Growth Spiral in hand now, so we can put the Triumph into hand, and then we can play either of these, I think. We'll go for the Stomping Ground, and then we can Spiral into our 5th land, which is pretty sick. So we're already at Niv mana here, which is pretty crazy. Now the opponent can reconfigure here, and they could start going off the top of their deck, but they've only got 2 cards in hand, and we do have a lot of ways to dig for creature removal. So I mean, I guess the issue at that point is creature removal doesn't cleanly kill Reality Chip once it's reconfigured. We'd have to find removal for the Ornithopter and then removal for the Reality Chip once it kind of falls off. So they do reconfigure, which is a little bit annoying. I mean, yeah, I think Assassin's Trophy is the only thing that cleanly kills it. We could try and find 2 removal spells here, but even outside of that, you know, we've got Niv. Oh wow, okay, there's Assassin's Trophy. Sick. I mean, I think we could just go to Niv and try and ride that, but I think just to play it safe, yeah, we'll definitely get Scarab God here, but just to play it safe, I think we'll just trophy the Reality Chip now, just in case, because they could have, I don't know exactly how their deck is built, they could have a crazy amount of stuff that they could play in one turn. You know, if they hit Psy off the top into a bunch of artifacts, that could be really difficult to come back from. So I think I'm just going to play it safe and just trophy the Reality Chip now, and now they're just completely out of gas here. Bag of Holding is interesting. I don't know how good that card is really. I mean, I guess it's a card advantage engine that's an artifact, so it kind of plays well in an artifact deck, but okay, they just pass here. So they could have Metallic Rebuke here, but since we now have a second Niv, I think I'm just going to run it out. And if they do have Rebuke, that just means they don't have anything else in hand after that. So we'll just slam Niv here, and if it resolves, then we can, you know, we have 2 treasures off the Thieving, so we can keep mana up for whatever we hit off it. Looks like they're thinking about something here. I guess they can loot with the Bag of Holding to try. Oh wow, okay, they got Moonsnow Prototype to bounce the Thieving. So that does mean we lose the Scarab God, but I don't think it will really matter in this specific matchup. We'll bottom the... Oh wow, we only hit one thing, that's unlucky. But there's no point in putting the Thieving on top with Niv on the stack, because that's just one mono-coloured card that won't count as a hit for Niv. We could have trophied the Bag of Holding, but honestly, I don't really care about the stuff they have underneath it. You know, if they want to put a Patchwork Automaton and a Moonsnow Prototype into their hand, that's fine by me. If they hit something that I am concerned about, then I think I will trophy it at that point. You know, if they hit like a Psy, or I don't really know what else I'm concerned about, maybe an Emery or something, then I could see Assassins trophying it. But right now, with just those 2 underneath, I'm not really too fussed. So I think I'll play the Thieving here. See what we hit. Wow, we hit another Niv, that's great. And then I'm happy to play Omnath here. You know, it doesn't... We could have held the land to gain 4 life, but we would have had to use up an extra treasure, and we're not worried about life total at all at the moment, so I think doing it this way round is better, just to save a treasure. And then we can pass, and we've still got Assassin's Trophy mana up, just in case they hit something good off the Bag of Holding here. So they loot again. And I think we'll get an opportunity... Well, I mean, we'll get an opportunity to respond before they untap anyway, but I'll set a stop just in case. Okay, another land. I'm not fussed about that. Let them have that. So it'll be interesting to see what is in their deck, because I feel like the difference in power level between the historic version and this seems like it's pretty huge, because Nettle Cyst and Thought Monitor are 2 of the most important cards in the historic version, which obviously aren't legal in Explorer. The only artifact deck that I've played in Explorer that I've had decent success with is a combo deck using Saheeli Rai with Luxior, where you can make infinite artifact copies of Saheeli Rai, and if you have that alongside, I can't remember the name of it, there's a 2-mana red creature that deals 1 damage to any target, or it deals 1 damage every time an artifact enters the battlefield, so you can just go infinite with damage with that, and that deck was pretty reasonable. But outside of that, you know, I've not really had much success with artifact decks. Sai is legal, which is one of the strongest artifact payoffs, but outside of that, I'm not really sure there's that many good payoffs. Another deck that I tried was Grixis Artifacts with only Cult Anvil and Sai, which was also fairly reasonable, but again, it just didn't feel better than any of the other Anvil decks. I feel like there are a lot of better sacrifice decks that you can play. But I mean, I think there's still potential for artifact decks. You know, like I said, Sai is legal, Emry's legal, Reality Chip is legal, but I just feel like not having access to Nettle System Thought Monitor is pretty huge. Obviously, the more artifacts that get added, the better the deck will become, but okay, so Automaton is growing a little bit, but we have more than enough mana to pay for the ward tax, so I'm really not concerned about that. We'll lead on iteration here just to see what we hit. Okay, nice. So we got another Thieving and another Trophy here. I think we'll put Trophy into hand for later, and then we'll just go for another Thieving here. Now all of our 2-mana multicoloured spells basically just cost nothing, because we get 2 treasures back immediately, which is pretty sick. Okay, we'll just take the Clarion there, and then we'll just attack him with both. And now they kind of have to keep the Automaton back to block with. Oh, we can just kill it with the Trophy anyway, so I'm pretty confident about this game. They need to draw something pretty sick here to survive. Yeah, okay. So, interesting. I'm not really sure what the opponent has in their deck, to be honest. Like, we've seen a few cards, but I don't really know what exactly the rest of the deck is. Like, I am concerned about Sai. That is a card I'm worried about, because that is a card, I mean, we've got Clarion to be able to mop up the tokens, but that is a card that's going to be very difficult to attack past. You know, the main way we're closing games out is with Niv and Omnath, but we don't really have anything good in the sideboard. You know, Justice Strike is our only extra creature removal, and that doesn't kill Sai because it's a 1/4. So, and since we don't really know what the opponent's deck has other than artifacts, I'm just going to run it back. I don't want to miss sideboard when I don't really know exactly what's going on the other side. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the red is for. I was trying a red-blue artifact deck with Dragon Spark Reactor, and also Voltage Surge is another card that they probably would be running if they're playing red. Yeah, maybe I should return to the Saheeli deck. Saheeli Luxior combo, like, I did manage to get a 5-0 with it in a constructed event, but it still felt a little bit clunky. But I definitely think there's something powerful there. It would just be a lot better if there was a better payoff for making infinite Saheeli tokens than that 2-mana creature that I can't remember the name of, something Fireweaver. But yeah, if I can make that deck better, make it feel a bit less clunky, then I might do a video on it in future. We'll see. Okay, so going second this game. I mean, I think we have to mulligan because there's 2 tap lands there. This feels like a proper sketchy keep, but the opponent's deck didn't look too fast, and we have 2 triomes that we can cycle away, and Thieving is pretty good as well. I mean, this might be a greedy keep, but we kind of want lands. We want to keep hitting our land drops, is really important in this deck, and we're going to draw spells in the first few turns unless we get really unlucky. So if the opponent was playing a really fast aggressive deck, then you obviously couldn't keep this, but the opponent's deck did look more value based rather than trying to close the game out quickly. Spiral's great as well, because now we can ramp on the extra lands that we have, and the draw is more likely to draw us into non-lands to play as well. So okay, turn 2 Automaton is a little bit scary, but they didn't look like they had a ton of like 0 mana artifacts to really like supercharge, get it quick, like big quickly. And you know, since we have the Growth Spiral, we can already next turn go Assassin's Trophy and pay the 2 ward tax if it does get really big really quickly. Wow, Nasa. Okay, that's not a card I expected to see. Interesting. So they pivot more to like a control sort of deck, or maybe they just have Planeswalkers for grindy matchups. I'm not sure. So I think we'll lead on the Thieving here. We could trophy the Narset, but I'm not too fussed about that. The only thing the Narset passive really stops is Growth Spiral and Omnath, but neither of which we have in hand. And even though I would like to keep the Triones to cycle with, since we now have Niv under the Thieving, we're pretty incentivized to keep more lands, I think, because we want to get that Hideaway cost paid as quickly as possible now. Wow, Saheeli, okay. So yeah, it looks like I guess we are a control deck, and it does make sense to have Planeswalkers in this sort of matchup, because we do, outside of Assassin's Trophy, we are kind of a little bit soft to Planeswalkers, because we can't really attack them down that easily, especially if the opponent's running removal. Like, obviously we have Niv and Omnath, but if the opponent can chump block, or they have ways to kill either of those, it's quite difficult for us to attack Planeswalkers, and our only real answer other than that is Assassin's Trophy, which, I mean, thankfully we have Trophy in hand, so I assume they'll play this Saheeli here, and we do kind of need to answer that straight away, because similar to Sai, although we do have Clarion to be able to kill the tokens that Saheeli makes, but it's a card that we would need to kill at some point, so I think it's better to do it sooner rather than later. And I also think that we probably are pretty incentivized to Clarion here before this Automaton gets even bigger. You know, we were quite lucky they didn't make it any bigger, so Clarion can now pretty cleanly kill the Automaton, and then we can just kill this Saheeli with the Assassin's Trophy here. And then next turn we can... I mean, Growth Spiraling with Narset in play kind of sucks, but we can Growth Spiral just to trigger the Widespread Thieving to get Niv out. Now, it could be a disaster if they have Metallic Rebuke, because I don't think we have enough mana to go Spiral, pay the Hideaway. Actually, we wouldn't have 3 mana, but we'll see. I mean, I assume they're probably playing Metallic Rebuke. I'd be quite surprised if they weren't. Okay, so they play Karn here. I'd be interesting to see if they're running this many Planeswalkers game 1, or if they've just boarded in quite a lot because we're playing a control deck. Okay. Clarion's a nice draw here because we don't have to now play Spiral into Narset just to trigger the Niv off the hideout, and we can kill the 3/3 token, hopefully. Now, if they do have Metallic Rebuke, there's a chance they would snap it off before the Thieving triggers. I mean, we'll see. It would kind of suck if they have Rebuke, because we are almost completely out of gas if they do counter this Niv here, but I feel like at this point in the game we kind of just have to go for it and hope they don't have it. I mean, it looks like they have something. They're thinking about something. Okay, Gust. Okay, that's significantly better than Metallic Rebuke, because now that means that we can play around Gust next turn, which is pretty huge. Actually, no, we can. We've got 6 lands in play, so we can play around Gust now. Okay, so they plus the Karn. Interesting. Okay, Sai. Okay, that's not great. So, I mean, thankfully we've got Niv next turn, so hopefully we can dig for an answer to Sai, or potentially dig for an Assassin's Trophy for the Karn, so they can't get Sai from the exile. But Sai is definitely one of the cards that I'm scared of the most from their deck, because we've cut Scarab God, I think. I can't actually remember how I sideboarded. I think I cut Scarab God, and the only ways we have of winning is attacking with Niv, attacking with Omnath, and attacking with Gigantha, which is normally good, but if they can build up a board of blockers, like 1/1s, that can be kind of difficult. Although, having said that, we do also have Deafening Clarion that can kill them all, so we'll see how it plays out. Okay, so they play Ornithopter. And Shadow Spear. I mean, I'm really hoping they tap out so that we don't have to worry about Rebuke. We'll see if they do though. Okay, they don't tap out, but I mean we can still play around Rebuke here with the mana we have available. Just gotta hope they don't have 2 Rebukes or something stupid. Okay, sweet. So Niv resolves, which is great. Wow, okay, that's a nice hit. And I think we're pretty incentivized to trophy the Khan now so that they don't get the Psy off the exile. Now again, they could Metallic Rebuke before we get the treasure off Thieving, which could be an issue, but I think we still just have to go for it now. Actually, hold on, that was probably better to do during the opponent's upkeep. Oh wow, they only have 2 basics, interesting. I have to remember that if it goes to game 3, but yeah, so I think we should have done that during the upkeep. There wasn't any real reason to do that during my turn, thinking about it, but either way we didn't get punished for it, so it worked out. So overall I feel pretty good about this spot now. We have a lot of ways to refuel. I would really like to kill this Narset because it is kind of hurting our ability to play Growth Spirals, but since we have Widespread Thieving in play, I think we could fairly easily just fire these off during the opponent's end step instead. Like, even though it will use up, like it will net us, or it will lose us a net treasure by doing it now, I think we're kind of incentivized to, because we obviously can't Growth Spiral during our turn while Narset's in play. Okay, Emery. So they are running Emery. I mean, since we saw Moxamber, I kind of assumed they would be. Okay, and they are running Metallic Rebuke. Not a huge surprise. There is definitely a tension between Metallic Rebuke and Reality Chip and Synthesizer though. So it'd be interesting to see if they were running that in the main or not. Well, okay, they equip the Ornithopter with Shadow Spear. I guess that's to try and soak up some damage from the Niv. So like I said, even though we're having to use up a treasure, I think I'm happy to Growth Spiral during the opponent's end step just to play around Narset's passive. Okay, Omnath. Bit annoying, like this Narset is kind of annoying, but again, it's not the end of the world. I think we're mainly just trying to dig for an answer for Emery. I think that's definitely the more pressing threat right now. So hopefully we'll hit something off this iteration here. Okay. So I think I'm happy playing this Thieving first here, and then it will make the iteration cost less. Oh wait, hold on, actually, if I'm going to play iteration, I shouldn't have played that Sacred Foundry, because we could hit a land off the iteration that we might want to play. So that was a misplay, I think. Oh, okay, we did keep Scarab God in. I couldn't remember how I sideboarded for a second. Oh yeah, we didn't make any changes. So I think we'll iteration here. Hopefully we hit something that we can cast off it so we don't have to waste a land. But we just want to dig for an answer to Emery. We could also just Clarion here. Okay, that was quite lucky. I should have ordered my triggers there. We got quite lucky that it automatically ordered it the right way. But yeah, Clarioning here is pretty sick, because then we can finally get rid of this Narset as well. And we still have 2 treasures to play whatever we hit off the iteration. Okay. So actually, the way things played out there, it was right to play the Sacred Foundry beforehand, because we wouldn't have been able to cast that Clarion if we hadn't. So since we have 2 Thievings in play, we can cast another iteration here and just get the mana back immediately. Basically, it's free. Okay, nice. So we can potentially put the Tyrant Scorn into hand and then trophy the Shadow Spear. Because, I mean, Shadow Spear is a way they can potentially try and stabilize here. Well, not stabilize, but try and race a little bit. So hopefully we kill the Narset here. Okay, Narset's down, which is great because now our Omnath and Growth Spirals can be played during our turn and we can draw from them. We'll kill the Shadow Spear here. And we know they don't have any more basics in the deck, so there's no drawback from playing the trophy. Now, I mean, that could have been slightly greedy. There is an argument to maybe putting Assassin's Trophy into hand off the iteration and saving it in case they play like a Khan or something, but we have Niv in play that can attack down Planeswalkers now anyway, so I think that was fine. Okay, they have another Narset. Thankfully we already have a creature in play that can kill it, and we have Tyrant Scorn to kill any creatures they can play to block it. Like if they play another Ornithopter, we can just kill it and then attack with the Niv. Okay, opponent plays Bankbuster, we're not concerned about that at all. See what else they have. Okay, again, I think I'm going to Growth Spiral during the end step, and now since we have both Thievings in play, it's basically free, so not an issue. Wow, okay, another Niv, that's sick. So yeah, I feel pretty confident now. Even if they drew like a Sai or an Emery, we already have an answer for that, so I think we'll lead on taking out the Narset here. We could start going face, but we don't want to let them get an extra activation, and we would quite like to play the Omnath and actually be able to draw a card as well. Okay, Moonsnare Prototype, sure. So that is a little bit annoying. I think we'll put that on top. Even though we have another Niv, you know, having multiple Nivs is always going to be good. And then I don't really want to play Omnath out while they have a Narset in play, so I think we're just happy to put Gigantha into hand and play it here. We could have cast the Niv, but I would quite like to have access to both Nivs here. You know, if we played that first Niv, we would have just lost access to the second one that's on top of our library. So, and since we're not under any pressure right now, I think we can afford to play a little bit slower. And doing it this way round, we still have Gigantha that can kill the Narset, which is nice. Okay. That is an issue. Antiquities War is a card that could beat us. So maybe we are going to get a little bit punished for not playing quicker, not pressuring their life total a bit. I mean, we still have outs. We can gain a bunch of life. We can produce quite a few blockers as well. And obviously we have Assassin's Trophy in the deck that can kill it cleanly as well. But, we're going to have to move a little bit faster now because Antiquities War is a way they could win here. So, what to do? I think we'll lead on Niv, and I think we're not going to use Gigantha to pay for it because we would quite like to attack down Narset if possible here. See what we hit here. Oh, perfect, okay. We hit the Assassin's Trophy, which is sick. So now we can just cleanly kill the Antiquities War, and now they back to not having much going on. We can just cleanly kill the Narset afterwards with Gigantha. Okay, sick. Yeah, we got there.